The galaxy's deadliest council thought they had seen it all, but then 3 humans walked in wearing nothing but t-shirts and Smirks. Today, humanity will prove once again that we are unstoppable, intelligent, and completely unpredictable. Watch how the Terrans rewrite history without firing a single shot. Get ready. Did to favor no one, also the architects claimed. In truth, it favored those who had written the rules. Representatives of the most lethal civilizations in the galaxy occupied their assigned platforms, armored titans from high-grade worlds, lattice-bodied intellects humming with internal processes, predators whose very posture was a declaration of dominance. Into this hall stepped the Terrans. They did not arrive with a procession. No honor guard. No display of force. The doors opened, and 3 humans walked in at an unhurried pace, dressed in simple fabric garments that clung lightly to their frames. No visible weapons. No environmental suits. One of them carried a data slate under his arm like a clipboard. A murmur rippled through the Concord. Several alien delegates adjusted their senses, assuming a misread. Surely this was not the delegation from the Deathworld called Earth. Surely the species whose home gravity crushed bone, and whose ecosystems consumed the unprepared would not present itself like this. Ambassador Elias Crow felt the attention settle on him like pressure before a storm. He did not straighten his shoulders, alter his pace. Years of negotiation had taught him that confidence was not a performance, it was the absence of one. He stopped precisely where the protocol marker hovered in the air, glanced up at the tiers, and offered a small, polite nod. To his left, Dr. Marcus Hale's eyes moved constantly, tracking light delays, sound reflections, the subtle lag between translation fields. He looked, to an untrained observer, like a distracted academic. In reality, his mind was already mapping weaknesses. On Crow's right, Admiral Ruth Calder stood with her hands loosely clasped behind her back. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, but it was the stillness of someone who had spent a lifetime deciding when not to move. A Vakeen Dominion speaker leaned forward, its segmented mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement. "These are the humans," it asked, voice amplified to fill the chamber. "We were promised Deathworlders. I see no armor, no enhancements." Laughter, some chemical, some electronic, echoed across the tiers. Crow waited for the sound to die. He did not rush to fill silence. Silence, he had learned, made others uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "We were informed this was a council, not a battlefield," he said evenly. "We dressed accordingly." The Salith technocracy's representative flickered as streams of data cascaded over its crystalline form. "Your species' projected survival probability in any direct conflict represented here is negligible," it stated. "Your choice of presentation does not alter this assessment." "Of course not," Crow replied. "We didn't come to change your projections." That drew a pause. Hale glanced briefly at Crow, the corner of his mouth tightening, not a smile, but close. A Kroth Prime warlord slammed a clawed limb against its platform. "Then why are you here, human?" Crow met the creature's gaze without flinching. "Because you summoned us," he said. "And because history suggests that when a room full of powerful beings agrees too easily, something important is being misunderstood." The Concord shifted. Not in position, but in attention. The formal charges followed. Humanity's expansion labeled reckless. Their adaptability deemed destabilizing. Their refusal to submit to predefined hierarchies classified as a threat. Each accusation was delivered with certainty, backed by simulations, casualty estimates, and confidence born of long dominance. Crow listened. He nodded when appropriate. He did not interrupt. When the final statement concluded, a declaration that Earth would be subjected to enforced containment pending compliance, the chamber waited for the expected response. Please. Outrage. Defiance. Instead, Crow exhaled softly, as if considering the weather. "May I ask a question?" he said. The Vakeen speaker hesitated, then gestured assent. "Speak." "You've analyzed our fleets," Crow said. "Our industry. Our biology. You've run probabilities on how we fight." He paused, letting the translators keep pace. "Did any of you model how we think when we know we're outmatched?" Data flickered. Silence stretched. Hale stepped forward half a pace, tapping his slate once. "Specifically," He added mildly, "Did you account for asymmetrical escalation under moral constraint?" The Salith representative brightened. "Clarify." Admiral Calder finally spoke, her voice calm, almost conversational. "They didn't," she said. "Because you assumed we'd play the same game you would." Crow smiled then. Not wide, not arrogant. Just enough. "We didn't come here to threaten you," he said. "We came to understand the rules you believe govern this galaxy." He looked up at the tiers, meeting alien eyes one by one, and to see whether those rules still make sense in a universe where humans exist. Somewhere deep within the Concord systems, unnoticed by its masters, a series of assumptions quietly began to fail. The chamber did not erupt into outrage. That, more than anything else, unsettled the Terrans. Instead, the Obsidian Concord responded with calculation. Light shifted across the tiers as translation fields recalibrated and internal consultations fled to life. Species that had not altered posture in centuries leaned together, exchanged data bursts, ran simulations at accelerated speeds. To them, the humans were an anomaly, statistically insignificant, strategically irrelevant, yet behaviorally incorrect. Ambassador Elias Crow felt it in the air. The moment when mockery ended and curiosity began was always dangerous. Curiosity led to scrutiny, and scrutiny, in the wrong hands, became justification. "Containment parameters will proceed," the Salith representative announced at last. "However, prior to enforcement, the Concord will evaluate Terran strategic doctrine. Transparency may reduce unnecessary losses." Crow inclined his head. A reasonable request. The Vakeen speaker's mandibles flexed. "You will submit your military frameworks, decision hierarchies, and response thresholds." Dr. Marcus Hale let out a soft breath. "All of them?" he asked, as if clarifying a footnote. "All relevant systems," the Salith confirmed. "Incomplete disclosure will be interpreted as hostility." Crow turned slightly, just enough for Hale and Calder to see his face. He did not speak, but Calder caught the meaning instantly. "Permission granted." "We can do that," Crow said. "With one condition." A low growl rippled from the Croth Prime platform. "You are not in a position to bargain." Crow nodded. "Agreed. Which is why this is not a bargain. It's a clarification." He gestured lightly around the chamber. "You wish to understand how humans respond under existential pressure. That response depends entirely on whether we believe good faith exists in the room." The Salith's data stream slowed. "Define." "We will share our doctrine," Crow said. "In return, we request observer access to your evaluation process. No intervention. No veto. Just observation." Silence again. This time, longer. The Concord had not been asked to reveal its thinking in a very long time. Finally, the Vakeen speaker emitted a sharp click. "Granted. Observation only." Crow smiled politely. "That will suffice." What followed was not a data dump. It was a lesson. Hale began with history, not hardware. Conflicts humanity had lost. Wars decided against them before the first shot was fired. Moments where retreat had been chosen over pride, where survival outweighed victory. He spoke of constraints, ethical, logistical, psychological, not as weaknesses, but as variables. "We don't optimize for dominance," Hale said, his tone measured. "We optimize for continuity." Admiral Calder took over seamlessly. Fleet doctrines appeared in the air, stripped of classified specifics but rich in intent. Layers of redundancy. Decentralized command structures. Authority designed to fracture cleanly under pressure rather than collapse catastrophically. "You expect leaders to fall," she said. "So we train everyone else to keep going." The aliens listened. Some scoffed. Some recalculated. Then Crow spoke again. "You've categorized us as Deathworlders," he said. "You associate that with aggression, resilience, violence. That's incomplete." He paused. "Our most dangerous trait is not how hard we hit. It's how long we remember." The Salith representative ran a predictive model. It flagged an error. Then another. In scenarios where Terran defeat probability exceeds 90%, it said slowly, "Your models predict escalation beyond rational thresholds." Hale nodded. "That's the misunderstanding." Calder folded her arms. We don't escalate because we think we'll win, she said. We escalate because losing cleanly is unacceptable. The Concorde shifted again. This time, unease crept in. A minor representative, one of the observer species rarely heard from, interjected. You are describing mutual devastation. Crow met its gaze. No, he said. We're describing mutual consequence. Data streams spiked. Simulations branched. Outcomes that had once been neat collapsed into noise. The Vakeen speaker recoiled slightly. Your approach is inefficient. Yes, Crow agreed readily. But it's effective. The session adjourned shortly after. Officially, it was to allow further analysis. Unofficially, the Concorde needed time to reconcile a species that did not seek victory, yet refused defeat. As the Terrans exited the chamber, Calder exhaled for the first time in minutes. They didn't like that. No, Hale said. But they understood it. Crow said nothing. His expression had grown thoughtful. Back aboard their shuttle, the sterile quiet felt heavier than before. Systems hummed softly as the vessel disengaged from the Concorde's docking lattice. They are going to test us, Calder said. Indirectly. Hale nodded. Economic pressure. Proxy conflicts. Boundary probes. Crow stared out at the starfield. They won't attack us directly, he said. Not now. Why not? Calder asked. Because, Crow replied, for the first time, they are wondering what it would cost. The shuttle slipped into transit, carrying 3 humans back toward a fragile world that had just been noticed by the wrong audience. And somewhere within the Obsidian Concorde, a new classification was quietly drafted, one that did not yet have a name, but already carried a warning. The first probe arrived without a fleet. That alone told Admiral Ruth Calder everything she needed to know. It came disguised as trade arbitration, a Salith neutral assessment node dispatched to evaluate a minor shipping dispute near Terran-controlled space. On paper, it was routine. In practice, it was a sensor array wrapped in legal language, bristling with passive scanners and behavioral analytics. They are poking the fence, Calder said, watching the feed scroll across the tactical display. Measuring how we react when we think it doesn't matter. Dr. Marcus Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Classic Concorde behavior. If we ignore it, they label us callous. If we overreact, they label us unstable. Ambassador Elias Crow said nothing. He was reading the arbitration request again, slower this time, eyes narrowing at phrasing most diplomats would skim past. They are not here for ships, he said finally. They are here for people. Calder glanced at him. Explain. They want to see who we send, Crow said. How authority manifests when it's not ceremonial. Whether our decision-making compresses or fractures under ambiguity. Hale smiled faintly. So we give them ambiguity. The Terran response was deliberately unremarkable. No admirals. No flag officers. The arbitration node was met by a civilian logistics coordinator, a mid-level systems engineer, and a rotating AI liaison with strictly limited permissions. Everything was transparent. Everything was polite. Everything was just inefficient enough to be frustrating. The Salith observers adjusted parameters. The results refused to converge. Terran personnel deferred laterally rather than vertically. Decisions emerged through consensus checks that looked, from the outside, like indecision, but always resolved just before consequences accumulated. Authority was present, but it was distributed, hard to isolate, harder to neutralize. Within days, a second probe followed. This one economic. Trade routes subtly shifted. Insurance premiums rose. Peripheral allies received risk advisories regarding Terran unpredictability. Nothing overt. Nothing that justified retaliation. Pressure without fingerprints, Calder muttered. They're good. Yes, Hale agreed. But they're impatient. Crow nodded. And impatience is expensive. Humanity did not counter the pressure directly. Instead, Terran shipping firms quietly rerouted traffic through longer paths, favoring reliability over speed. Margins tightened, but so did relationships. Independent systems, previously indifferent, began to notice that Terran contracts were honored precisely, even when inconvenient. The Concorde's models adjusted. Profit-loss projections ticked upward, on their side. Then came the third probe. A Croth Prime security exercise near a shared border. Heavily armed. Ostensibly defensive. Clothes enough to be provocative. Calder stood in the operations center, hands on the rail, eyes fixed on the holographic display. They want us to posture. No, Crow said quietly. They want us to blink. The Terran fleet did not mobilize. Instead, a single message was transmitted on an open channel, routed through Concord standard protocols, so it could not be dismissed as informal. It contained coordinates, timestamps, and a short advisory regarding gravitational shear near the Croth exercise zone, complete with peer-reviewed Terran data. Hale looked up from his console. You're giving them safety tips. I'm giving them a choice, Crow replied. The Croth ignored the advisory. 2 hours later, one of their capital vessels suffered a catastrophic systems failure when an unaccounted-for gravity eddy destabilized its internal structure. No weapons fire. No Terran involvement. Rescue beacons activated automatically. Terran ships were the first to respond. Calder authorized assistance without hesitation. Medical teams crossed hulls. Engineers stabilized drives. Every action was logged, timestamped, and shared transparently with the Concorde. The message was clear, though never stated outright. We warned you. We helped you anyway. We are paying attention. The Concorde reacted with something new. Caution. Internal debates intensified. Species that had once dismissed humanity now argued margins and contingencies. The Salith ran deeper simulations, long-term ones this time. Projections stretched not years, but generations. They did not like what they saw. Terrans did not dominate quickly. They endured. They adapted. They absorbed losses without fracturing and learned from every interaction. In models where humanity lost territory, they gained influence. In models where they were isolated, they became indispensable. The most troubling outcome emerged repeatedly. Scenarios in which opposing the Terrans was technically successful and strategically disastrous. Crow was summoned again to the Obsidian Concorde. This time, there was no laughter. You are altering systemic equilibria, the Salith representative said. Without direct confrontation. Crow folded his hands. We're participating, he said. The system is responding. The Vakeen speaker leaned forward, mandible still. You manipulate without force. We prefer the Thames stewardship, Crow replied. That is a lie, the Croth warlord growled. Crow met its gaze calmly. No, he said. It's a difference in objectives. Silence fell, not imposed, but chosen. For the first time since the Terrans had entered the chamber in simple clothes and quiet confidence, the Concorde faced a realization it had not modeled adequately. Humanity was not trying to win. They were trying to make certain kinds of outcomes impossible. And that, the Concorde was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous. The Obsidian Concorde convened again, but this time, the atmosphere was markedly different. Where once there had been arrogance, now there was wariness. The Terrans had proven a subtle form of influence, not violent, not aggressive, but precise and unavoidable. Every small action, every benign decision had ripple effects, and the Concorde's delegates were beginning to feel the consequences. Ambassador Elias Crow entered the chamber last, letting Dr. Marcus Hale and Admiral Ruth Calder precede him. Hale carried a stack of projected simulations, each carefully annotated. Calder's presence alone signaled that this session was no longer ceremonial. It was strategic. The Concorde had requested it under the pretense of discussion, but everyone involved knew better. This was an evaluation. A Vakeen Dominion counselor, tentacles flicking in subtle agitation, opened the proceedings. Terrans, it said, voice smooth but edged with suspicion, your recent actions suggest adaptability beyond the predicted limits. Explain. Crow nodded. Calmly, his expression neutral. We respond to circumstances, he said. Our decisions are guided by principle and outcome, not by your expectations. The Salith technocracy representative's crystalline form shimmered. You manipulate our predictive models. You impose constraints without engagement. Constraints are unavoidable, Calder said plainly. Ignoring them would be irresponsible. Hale interjected. You misinterpret our methods as manipulation because you assess them through linear cause and effect. Human reasoning is iterative, with feedback loops we call learning and adaptation. Your models cannot fully simulate it. The Croth Prime Warlord's claws tapped against the platform. You act in ways that defy your weakness. You achieve results that defy probability. Crow lifted a hand. We do not defy probability. We account for it. Our strength is in observation, anticipation, and adjustment. You assumed we would act rashly. We did not. You assumed we would escalate violence to achieve your expectations. We did not. That is the difference. The Concord paused. Every representative considered the implications. The projections, those endless lines of simulations and outcome probabilities, now showed divergence. Terran actions were not anomalies to be corrected. They were variables that destabilized previously assumed constants. Hale presented a recent scenario. A minor fleet maneuver, an unarmed trade convoy, and 2 unremarkable colonies were sufficient to trigger realignment in 3 separate species policies. This was never the objective. The outcome, however, is beneficial to all parties because no conflict occurred. A Vakeen counselor made a sharp clicking sound. You gain influence without confrontation. You expand without conflict. That violates all historical precedents. Crow allowed a small smile. We do not expand to dominate. We expand to endure. Influence is a byproduct, not the goal. Calder added, and if conflict arises, we are prepared, but only where principles and survival intersect. Arbitrary confrontation is not in our interest. The chamber fell silent. Not because of fear, but because the delegates were calculating, adjusting, and, perhaps for the first time, doubting the assumptions that had guided them for centuries. Crow observed this quietly. You see, he said softly, humans are not constrained by your expectations. We are constrained only by necessity and by ethics. Everything else is adaptation. The Salith representative hesitated, then asked, and yet you wear simple garments when entering the Concord? No weapons, no armor. Crow nodded. Because confidence and principle do not require adornment, and because we wish to be understood before judged. Hale tapped a few keys, projecting comparative data. By choosing simplicity, we remove distractions. Attention focuses where it matters, the substance of decisions. The Concord's responses, under these conditions, are revealing. The Croth Prime growled softly. This is dangerous. You teach without teaching. You force choices by existing. Crow tilted his head. Yes. And by existing, we ensure that any future conflict is informed. Decisions cannot be coerced, only considered. A ripple of unease moved through the Concord. Delegates consulted quietly. The Terrans did not act threateningly, yet the message was unmistakable. Any attempt to control or underestimate them would have consequences far beyond expectation. As the session adjourned, Crow walked last, silent, eyes scanning the assembly. Hale and Calder flanked him. Outside, the corridors of the Concord seemed almost smaller than before, as if the presence of 3 humans had subtly shifted the weight of centuries of arrogance. The Terrans returned to their shuttle, calm and collected. Each had contributed, each had observed, each had measured. The Concord would take time to digest what had transpired, but Crow knew the truth. Perception had changed, and with it, the foundation of their interactions with the galaxy's most dangerous powers. And somewhere in the Concord's control arrays, predictive models quietly flagged a new category: human behavior, unpredictable, adaptive, relentless. The shuttle's engines hummed softly as it slipped away from the obsidian Concord, the vast chamber fading behind them into memory. Outside, the black and purple void stretched endlessly, dotted with distant stars and flickering alien satellites, a calm yet tense canvas for what had just transpired. Ambassador Elias Crow sat back, hands folded neatly on his lap. He did not speak, letting the silence stretch, heavy with thought. Dr. Marcus Hale reviewed the recorded data streams once more, eyes scanning for patterns, minor anomalies, and traces of unanticipated reactions. Even now, he sought insight into how subtle actions had shaped the galaxy's most powerful council. Admiral Ruth Calder, seated opposite, allowed herself the faintest exhale. The rigid control she carried aboard fleets, the constant weighing of risk versus reward, relaxed for a single instant. They didn't like that, she said softly, though she did not look at Crow. No, he replied quietly. But they understood it. The shuttle's observation deck displayed the distant Concorde as a silhouette against the nebula-lit void. Its obsidian-black architecture seemed even more imposing now, as if aware that the humans who had walked its halls had shifted something fundamental within its walls. They will think twice before underestimating us again, Hale murmured. Crow inclined his head slightly. They will not act rashly, not directly. But indirect pressure will increase. Tests, observations, calculated moves. Calder's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. And we'll respond how? With the same precision, Crow said. Observation, adaptation, morality, every action measured, every decision intentional. That is our strength. Hale looked up from his data slate. It's almost as if the Concorde is learning, and we are the curriculum. Crow allowed a thin smile. Exactly. They have only begun to see what humans are capable of without raising a weapon. That understanding, more than force, is what reshapes history. The shuttle slipped farther into transit corridors, carrying 3 humans back toward a fragile world now quietly recognized by the galaxy's most dangerous powers. Outside, the stars stretched in silent witness, as if acknowledging the subtle yet profound mark humanity had just made. Somewhere deep within the Concorde systems, models flickered and recalculated. A single category, repeatedly flagged, glowed brighter than the rest: human behavior, adaptive, relentless, unpredictable. And with that, the first lesson was complete.